Hey everyone, today we're doing 5 intermediate lizard pets. So we did one about beginner and now we're going to do one about intermediates. So the reason why some of the ones that you thought I would have put on the beginner one are going to appear on this list is, where are you going, buddy? Is basically because of one reason, and that is that with the beginner ones, they don't have to have UVB light and their diets are a little bit easier. There are several other reasons why they are a little bit different, but that is the main reason why they were beginners. And so when we move up to the more intermediate ones, these are ones that I would say all of them should have UVB, and their care, enclosures, whatever else is going to be a little bit larger, a little more intensive, require a little bit more forethought, and in all honesty, some of them might cost a little bit more as well. So there, and these aren't to say these are the only intermediate ones. These are just 5 choices that I either know of, would recommend, or are kind of more commonly available, or have had in the past that I would say would make good choices. And so the first up on this list, to be completely honest with you, I think is probably the best intermediate choice is the blue-tongued skink. This is Warlock. He is our northern blue-tongued skink. So there are northerns and easterns, and then there's a couple other ones, but primarily here in the US, we only have the northerns and the easterns, and then some Irian subspecies that are a little bit more tropical. These guys are an Australian species. They need high basking spots, they need UVB, they still need to have humidity, and they need varied diets. So there are some kind of commercial ones starting to come out these days, but if not, just change it up with, hard-boiled eggs, maybe small pinky mice, bugs, different vegetables, like your kind of vegetable mix like you would feed to like your bearded dragon or iguana or whatever. Just changing those up, always remembering to add a little bit of calcium and multivitamin powder for them. Honestly, these guys need a fairly large enclosure. So kind of like with the bearded dragon that we're going to talk about in a little second, because that's obviously going to be on this list. At minimum, I would say 40-gallon tank at bare minimum, but honestly, I think a 4x2 enclosure is really good for these guys. They will climb if you give them a chance, not very high, but over over logs or large rocks. They will like to dig, so plenty of substrate, but these guys make amazing intermediate and honestly fairly handleable reptile pets. We're still working on that with Warlock, but he has some bit of issues. So you can see his wonky jaw. His previous owner had him attacked. He escaped. He got attacked by a cat, but we're working on handling, and clearly he's doing pretty good once he's out. And this is the Leachianus gecko, or lychee gecko, or giant day gecko. Well, it's not day gecko, or giant gecko, or colossal gecko. Either way, this is the largest species of gecko on the planet, the Leachianus or lychee gecko. So these guys are part of the New Caledonian geckos, like the crusties and gargoyles. This is the biggest one. So you can clearly see this thing is a bit of a monster. It's very heavy for a gecko. She's just really, really big. We have 2 females. We hoped we got a pair, but we have 2 girls. The reason why these guys are intermediate as far as just basic care and as a pet goes is that their care is not all that different from a crested gecko, other than the fact it just needs to be a lot bigger. So these guys are kept in Zoo Med skyscrapers. So that is 18 by 18 by 36, so they're 3 feet tall. And so when you think about a normal day gecko or a crested gecko, I just keep saying day gecko. When you think about a crested gecko, that's normally kept in like a 12 by 18 or a 18 by 24. This is 18 by 36. So they just need a lot more room. They need a lot more places to kind of hide. And then their diets, you can feed them the kind of crested gecko diet, but I think you should probably vary their diet a little bit more. Protein matter, so more crickets, more roaches. I've seen people do pinky mice. I think that should be fairly sparingly, but I'm not the biggest lychee breeder, so I'm not going to say don't do it or not do it. I really don't. They mostly just get different crested gecko diets, and from me, they also get dubias and crickets. So these guys, I think they should get UVB, just like a lot of lizards, but if there was one on this list that you could get away with not doing, or I would say you'd be okay, it would be these, but I still say if you can give it, you absolutely should. The reason why These guys are on this list versus the beginner one is number one of how big they get. Number two, they are more expensive. So there are specific island locales of these, and if you have the proper documentation of those, and for some reason males are harder to come by, they will go for a lot of money. But even a small juvenile, unsexed, so if you don't know if it's a male or female, can still go for over $600. So that's a pretty pricey little animal. But that's why they're on this list, not the other one. And the other one is, do you see how big that head is? So if you're going to get a bite from one of these guys, I would say this is arguably a worse bite than like a tokay gecko. You know, the notorious tokay gecko is quick to bite and chomp on. That's because it's just a bigger animal. They can probably break skin. They're not likely to bite. They're going to try to get away like a lot of geckos. But a bite from one of these is not going to be as good or okay as a crested gecko bite, where it's more startling. These guys might actually break some skin. But the other reason is that if you're going to try to breed these, I would not classify these as an intermediate lizard species to breed. I would definitely say they are more advanced. These guys are very likely to kind of attack each other. Specifically, females will attack males. And like I said, because of the size of these guys, they can really do some harm on each other. And there's a lot of different breeders out there who say different things about how they do it, whether they will put them in an entirely separate one and put them together with like separate hides and nothing smells like the other one. The female will put into the male will put into the female, multiple males and with one female. There's all sorts of different things, but they are fairly hard to breed consistently. And you have to kind of keep an eye on them. So they're not an easy one to breed, but they can be handleable, and they're certainly really cool little lizards, but not as handleable as, say, a bearded dragon or blue-tongued skink, and probably they're not as jumpy and skittish as cresties and gargoyles, but they're still not the most handleable of lizards. Geckos in general aren't the most handleable lizard, but anyway, lychee geckos, they're really cool, and I'll do a whole species spotlight on them later. So next on the list is the bearded dragon. So obviously I have to include bearded dragons. There's a couple of reasons why they're not on the beginner list versus the intermediate list. And so first off, I want to clarify and say, I think that bearded dragons are very good pets. They absolutely 100% are. They can be good pets for sure. Very handleable, very tolerable. They can still kind of sometimes attitude, including mine, which is why she's not out, because we're working on that. But the reason why I don't think they're the best beginner reptile is because, number one, they need UVB. So all the beginner ones that I put on there, they don't necessarily have to have it to lead their full lives. Sure, it can improve on it, but they have to have it. Otherwise, they'll develop metabolic bone disease and a whole lot of other things. So they need to have that. So that's already one additional thing you have to keep an eye on. The next one is they need very high hot spots, much higher than like a leopard gecko, over 100 degrees for a basking spot. They need more room, minimum 40-gallon tank. I think you should at least go to a 75-gallon if that's what you have, or a 4x2 enclosure I think is a really good size for adults. Or is it like 4 foot, 2 foot, 1 foot? Because then they can kind of climb, because they will use that. They can dig, because they will dig, and it gives them lots of space to kind of thermoregulate more properly, because lizards are, it seems to me, based on what I've seen on their behavior, much more attuned to kind of thermoregulation than snakes. They certainly do it, but they're a lot more sedentary in their actions when it comes to thermoregulation. Lizards, they're a lot more moving around. They bask in different hot spots for smaller periods of time to adjust correctly. At least that's what I have seen. The last reason is that bearded dragons require very varied diets, very varied diets. V-E-R, V-A-R. Anyway, so a lot of the information about bearded dragons isn't necessarily 100% correct. And we're also dealing with a fairly small genetic isolated population here in the States. So everything we kind of know about bearded dragons is not necessarily 100% correct. So they still need to have varied diets. They still need to have insect matter. They still need to have veggie matter, but maybe not in the ratios that we all think about it. And I'll go into a whole video about why bearded dragons aren't the best beginner lizard, but still good pets later. But I'm just sticking with this. They can be very good pets, but you have to remember they need the UVB, they need the more space. and all that costs more. They need a much more varied diet than just kind of different bugs with calcium supplements. They need a lot of varied veggies. They need varied insects, all still with the things. You can give them small pinkies. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you can. You can give them hard-boiled egg. Their diet just needs to be much more varied to give them proper nutrition than, say, a leopard gecko or a crested gecko or something like that. But so because of that, it's not to say that they're hard. It's just that they need a little bit more work than a lot of people really kind of first think about. So that's why I consider them classified as intermediate versus beginner. So the next one after the bearded dragon is what I think what kind of borderlines on advanced. You just have to really do your research and make sure you know what you're doing and you have all your stuff correct before you buy it, and that is the Uromastyx. So the Uromastyx, or like the spiny tail lizard I've heard them called, Uromastyx is actually their Latin name, but kind of in the trade and now more commonly, that's what they're called, is Uromastyx, and there's plenty of different subspecies. The most common, or kind of the cheaper and more inexpensive ones, are the red and yellow Saharan ones. So they're an agama species of lizard. They have a really nice spiky spiny tail at the back, and then they kind of look like a little chuckawalla or kind of agama looking basic lizard. And then depending on the different species, all that will change. The reds and the yellow Saharans, they are splattered with yellow and red things. There's also ornates, which are kind of this blue teal turquoisey color with splotches of red, yellow, and orange, but all their care is very similar. But I'm mostly going to be talking about kind of those three species because, and I guess you could say like the mollies that are really dark black, their care is very similar. So these lizard species are one of the ones that actually humidity can be a detriment to their health. They actually can't have high humidity levels at all. Like if you look at their humidity level where they're naturally found, it's in the single digits or 0%. They're found in the African desert, specifically these. There are other ones that are found throughout the Middle East, but the more common ones, they're kind of found in the African Saharan desert. And so that's very dry, very hot. So they need basking spots of over 120 degrees sometimes. I think that's a good basking spot. They need to have plenty of area for them to kind of thermoregulate. So they need to be kept hotter than a bearded dragon. They can't have a lot of humidity. So that's where it kind of gets into a bit of an issue. I think that you don't necessarily need to give them a water dish. If you do, make sure it's very small and that you can refill it quickly. But you can still give them the option of having that. But if you have a 75-gallon aquarium for your Uromastyx, I would give them a small, like little ramekin as a water dish because humidity is detrimental to their health. They get all the humidity they need from eating the veggies that they get. These lizards are basically 100% vegetarian. I'm sure if you did throw some crickets in there, they might chase them around a little bit, but they can be fed entirely veggies for their whole lives. You still need to vary it up. You still need to sprinkle them in with the calcium and multivitamin supplements as always. But you have to remember these guys are actually one of the few species that they can't have humidity. Make sure you give them plenty of fresh veggies and do that. The other thing is they still need a place to kind of hide. They still need a cool side of the aquarium, but make sure it still needs to be warmer in general. I keep saying aquarium, enclosure, because although this is a species that could do well in an aquarium, I still don't think they're the best for most species of reptiles in general. But so I give them their high basking spot on one side, a couple rock outcroppings to kind of stack up a little bit so they can bask really high. You need to make sure that they have that really nice high levels of UVB. And then the cool side, give them, another rock kind of outcropping from the hide under some different logs. Substrate, I've seen a lot of people keep them on millet. So kind of like the seeds that you would give to like birds and stuff. They can actually eat that and it can kind of help with the digestion. Honestly, if I were to get another Uromastyx, we had one years and years ago. It was another adult that was kind of given to us. But if we were to get another one, I would probably keep it on this new substrate that I found. It's this kind of desert substrate. It's a mixture of rock and play sand and things like that. That looks really cool. That I think can kind of help, imitate their natural thing. A nice thick layer for them to still dig in, but provide kind of a big area for them with millet and different veggies and stuff like that. The reason why I say you really need to dial it in is you need to make sure that their temps are correct before you get it in there. Otherwise, you can get a very lethargic and eventually sick little lizard. So you need to make sure that your temps are dialed in properly before you bring your lizard home. That's why it's still intermediate, but it's definitely one you need to make sure that you do your research on first. Like always, but definitely on this one. That's why it gets close to that advanced one, but they are fairly common in the trade, and you can keep them. Just need to really make sure you pay attention to those things. So the last one on the list is kind of a tie. I was thinking about these for a long time, but I don't know exactly where in to put this one because they're really kind of common, but they're not necessarily very handleable, but neither the other one. Honestly, they're both kind of display species. And we did a whole video about display species, including lizards and snakes. You can see that right here. But this last one, like I said, it's kind of a tie, and that is the different species of day geckos. So, when you think of the gecko, so the giant Madagascar day geckos, the crimsons, the peacocks, sunbursts, the electric blues, all those day geckos, and then the tokay gecko. So, like I said, they are both kind of more display animals. They don't really like to be handled much. Specifically with the day geckos, they will drop tails very easily. They will slough off skin if they feel threatened. So handling a day gecko is kind of a no-no. They're really cool, and you get a lot of fun interaction with them, setting up their aquarium with live plants, and you can make it bioactive, and it's cool to kind of watch them pop out and hunt for little bugs and come out around little leaves and lick their little gecko diet, but you really don't want to handle them. But they look really pretty. The care is fairly easy, but you just need to remember to make sure you give them lots of places to hide, plenty of vertical space, and they need that UVB because day geckos are fairly diurnal. Yes, they still come out at night. Mine are active at night too, like with my crested geckos, but they are fairly active during the day. My peacock gecko is out almost entirely during the day and never out at night. The giant day geckos are kind of more crepuscular. But the tokay gecko, everyone knows about the infamous tokay, right? Where its Latin name is gecko, because it makes that gecko sound. Like that's the sound that it makes when it's chirping when it's in distress. It goes gecko. And that's why it's called gecko. But tokays have that reputation, and fairly well deserved, for just going raw and opening up, being angry, and then if they get a hold of you, not wanting to let go. Actually, one of the tokay geckos that we ended up bringing home once was because I was looking at a gecko. It latched onto my thumb, and the store closed while we were in there, so we just brought it home because they went, yeah, you can keep that angry little thing. So there have been people who are breeding different morphs of tokay geckos that, because they're breeding them and interacting with them more, they're a little bit more handleable. But overall, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't handle your tokay and that they can't be, but in general, I think tokay geckos are definitely more of a display species. And because they can get fairly large, almost to the size of some of the New Caledonian giant geckos like the Leachy that we saw, they can get really big, so they could be a really cool display species. I just wouldn't necessarily handle them. The day geckos, they can have the prepared little fruit mix diet as well as some different bugs and stuff. The tokay geckos are insectivores, and actually they are carnivorous too. They will eat other geckos, including smaller tokay geckos. So if you're thinking about kind of the same setup, you probably have the same size enclosure for a large Madagascar giant day gecko. So at least 18 to 24 inches high, at least a foot wide, plenty of places to hide. But the male tokays and even female tokays can get really big, so maybe a little bit larger, plenty of big logs and tubes and lots of sturdy plants for them to hide in. And then same with those. The tokay geckos are nocturnal, so they're not as big on the UVB, but I still think I would give it to them, or at least a 12-hour day and night cycle for those. But day geckos do need the UVB. So there you go. 5 species. They're not what I would say the only ones, but ones that are fairly recognizable, fairly common, fairly easily to attain. Some of them are a little bit more pricier than others. So the Leachy giant day gecko, the blue-tongued skink, the bearded dragon, the Uromastyx, and then tokay geckos versus day geckos. Tokays are probably going to be a little bit more inexpensive. They're bred a little bit more readily, and I think they're still being imported fairly often. And day geckos, a lot of the importation's been kind of shut down a lot, and they're not as readily bred in the hobby as of yet, so they're probably getting a little bit more pricey. But those are lizards that I think can make good pets. Some of them more display, but that's kind of how, once you get into the reptile hobby a little bit, you end up finding a lot more of just appreciating the animal, not actually playing with it as much. But really good reptile pets that just need a little bit more care, thought, and husbandry than your beginner intro species. What do you guys think? Do you think I hit them all? Do you think there's another couple good contenders? Let me know down in the comments about other ones that you think are really good ones, or any ideas for future videos. Hit me up down below, jzsreptiles@gmail.com, Instagram, Facebook for all things reptile related, merch, questions about anything, whatnot. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll catch you next time.